Eminem, to be a white guy in a field that's dominated by black guys. He's like the Tiger Woods of it. Like he's it's well deserved. It's not because he's white. It's because of the subject matter and what he writes and the patterns he creates. They're incredible.
One of the things I think that it's important that they take from people like me, Jay-Z, is to see how long someone can actually go for. Jay is a good guy because it's almost like he can see what's going on in hip-hop. He's very in tune with the times. And then he does something his own way, and then other people follow it.
Never been afraid to holler about anything. Anything.
What up, guys? Your boy Quake, and I'm back with a brand new episode of Who's Bigger. This is only the second episode in this series. I dropped the first episode back in May. It was 50 Cent versus Drake. I wanted to see the response from it and to see if I should continue doing this series. If you haven't seen the first episode, go ahead and check that out. I explain the series a lot better there. And in this series, we just compare two artists against each other. We compare through 4 different categories, and we compare what they've done in the industry, and then at the end we determine who had the bigger and better career. However, on the first episode, I allowed you guys to determine that, and a lot of you guys did not like that. You guys wanted to hear my opinion at the end, so on this episode, I'm going to add my opinion. And as you guys can tell, on this episode, we're going to compare Eminem versus Jay-Z. These two artists are the longest lasting artists in hip-hop. They're still relevant to this day. If they release a project, a lot of people still check it out. They still listen to it. There are a lot of artists that are still making music, but when they release projects, no one really cares, or they're not as mainstream anymore. However, these two have broken the notion that hip-hop is out with the old and in with the new. These two are very old artists that have been in the game since the 90s, and they're still relevant. They defied all the odds. A lot of artists, when they come in, they only last maybe a year, to some lasting 10 years, which is a good long run, but these two have lasted for 3 decades. That's insane when you think about it. Music has changed so much since when they first came out. So that's why I decided to pit these two against each other. I've seen in their prime these two be compared a lot, and it's a very close battle. When people compare these two, there is a lot of great points on both ends on who's the king of hip-hop, who's the one that's had a bigger impact. And if you've seen the first episode, I break this down into 4 categories. The first one is debut impact. When they first came out, how did they impact the industry? How well did their first album do? What was their response from their peers? What was the response from the public? Did they make a huge impact? The second one is brand. How far did they take their brand? Were they just in America big, or were they globally big? Did they do deals outside of music? And if they did, how successful were they? Did their brand attract other artists to do features with them, to do collabs with them? Did other people follow them in terms of how well they marketed their brand? The third factor is cultural impact. After their first album, how big of an impact did they have in hip-hop and culture in general? Were a lot of people following what they were doing? Were a lot of people copying their style of music? Did future artists look up to them and take from their style? And did this artist end up taking shine away from other artists that were around him at that time? And the last category is longevity. How long did this artist last in their music career? Is the music that they're releasing still resonating in hip-hop today? Did their sales increase or decrease as time went on? And if they're not on top anymore, what was the reason why? Was it because they changed their style of music? Did they stop focusing on music and go into other things? Or was it because people just did not like their music anymore? And those are the 4 categories we are judging these artists on. So let's get into the video. The first one we're going to start out with is obviously debut impact, and we're going to start out with Eminem. And unlike the first episode, I do not have to set the stage of where the music industry was at this time, because both of these artists released both of their albums in the 90s, and at this time there really wasn't any bootlegging going on when it comes to music. It was very rare, and if it happened, it didn't really affect sales. However, before Eminem released his debut album, we must remember that there wasn't a lot of white rappers in the industry that were really doing well in hip-hop. There was Vanilla Ice, who did well with one single that sold millions and millions of copies of that single. And then there were the Beastie Boys. They did decent. They didn't sell that well, but they were very impactful in hip-hop. There were a few others as well, but like I said, no white rapper really made a huge impact in hip-hop, and one that lasted for a while. So we must remember that Eminem was really one of the first to do that and to last in this industry. Dr. Dre, even at that time, was told by various people around him not to sign Eminem because it could potentially ruin his career forever. That's how bad people looked at white rappers in general. They thought they weren't ever going to be successful in hip-hop.
I never heard anything like, really positive about, this kid can rap. It was always something dealing with the lyrical content or dealing with me being white, And I was kind of like, what the fuck? This is bullshit to me because, I felt like I was being overlooked as far as like having any talent or anything. I felt like my talent was like secondary.
However, on February 23rd, 1999, Eminem released his major label debut album, the Slim Shady LP. It ended up debuting at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and sold 283,000 copies within its first week. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but within a year, this album ended up going 4 times platinum in America. And exactly how did that happen? This is a random white rapper under the influence of Dr. Dre's production, all of a sudden went from 283,000 copies within the first week to selling 4 million copies within a year. How he did that was simple. The critics gave him amazing reviews. They were surprised at how Eminem approached his album. They'd never seen a white rapper with an expansive vocabulary and vivid imagination. He would make things like murder sound funny, and he would make fun of things that were very serious and make it entertaining to listen to. On top of that, his upbringing was very interesting, and nobody really heard a rapper going at their own mother. On top of that, he had 3 personalities: Eminem, Marshall Mathers, and Slim Shady, and this was all a great storm to create great music and to get a great response from critics. On top of that, he was a white rapper, so a lot of white people started listening to hip-hop because of him, and they could identify with him a lot more. However, despite this success, a lot of rappers didn't follow his path in terms of the type of comedic music that he would make. A lot of rappers would still be gangster rappers and do their own thing. Eminem had his very different and unique lane, but he included a whole different audience into hip-hop. And as of now, the Slim Shady LP in America alone has sold 5.5 million copies, and worldwide it sold 18 million copies. So that definitely says he had a huge debut impact. It might not have happened in the beginning, but overall it was a good look. Now let's talk about Jay-Z's debut impact. On June 25th, 1996, he released his debut album, Reasonable Doubt, with first week sales of 43,000 copies, and the album ended up peaking at number 23 on the Billboard 200. However, within a year, it ended up selling 420,000 copies. Now, these numbers may not seem so good looking back, but at that time, that was very good for a new artist. And on top of that, Jay-Z was still sort of independent. Even though he signed with Priority Records at that time, they were simply just distributing the music. They weren't promoting it. Jay-Z was the one that was putting all the effort, as well as Dame Dash, in promoting the music.
So it took a while, but when I really started getting serious, my first album came out in '96. Then it was like, and I had to put the album out myself. Nobody would sign me. They thought I was terrible. Every single record, I went to every single record label. They was like, this guy's terrible. He's nothing.
In that promotion, Jay-Z did find some Billboard Hot 100 success. The single that was Ain't No Playa / Dead Presidents, they were packaged into one single, peaked at number 50 on the Billboard Hot 100, which was a good look for someone who is basically independent. However, Jay-Z's Reasonable Doubt wasn't a huge impactful album in terms of hip hop. When the album came out, a lot of the reviews were saying that Jay-Z is just basically another artist that comes and goes. He's just rapping about the same thing other rappers are rapping about at that time. And the Source magazine reviewed the album in 1996 and gave it 4 mics out of 5, which was an insanely good look for a new artist. This is what brought Jay-Z the attention that he wanted, because if you guys remember back then, the Source magazine, when they gave out mics and they gave out 4 or better, everyone would go listen to your album because a lot of people trusted the Source's reviews and what they thought about projects. And a lot of the reviews were saying the same thing, that Jay-Z's subject matter wasn't anything special. This was just another rapper coming in the game. But like the review said, it was Jay-Z's delivery and flow that caught a lot of people's attention. And as of now, the album has sold well over 1.5 million copies in the United States alone, which means it's gone platinum and nearly double platinum. And as time has went on, comparing to other Jay-Z projects, a lot of people will consider Jay-Z's debut album a classic, or maybe even his best project to date. And Jay-Z and Eminem are perfect examples that if you don't have a great first impression, you can eventually become one of the best in what you're doing. Jay-Z, after the Reasonable Doubt reviews and sales, eventually inked a deal with the Def Jam, and that skyrocketed his career. And of course, as we know, after Eminem's first debut album, his second album sold an insane 1.76 million copies within the first week. So with that being said, don't ever allow the first impression to determine where you're scheduled to go in your life. Now let's talk about the second category, which is brand. How far did these two artists expand their brand? Did they venture off into other things besides music? And we're going to start off with Jay-Z. And as most people know, Jay-Z took his brand to the next level. Nowadays, he's not even looked at as a rapper anymore. He's looked at as a businessman. And that's because of all the deals he's done throughout his career and the insane success he's had with those deals. He's gone from doing clothing lines to beverages to having real estate to developing sports teams and managing them to owning record labels and eventually streaming services for record labels and so on and so forth. Jay-Z has done so much. I can't go over every little thing he's done, but we're going to talk about the few insane deals that he's had. In 2003, he did his first deal with Reebok collection, advertising his S. Carter collection, which was his shoes. Then in 1999 was Rocawear, which was founded by Dame Dash and Jay-Z and had annual sales of $700 million, which is insane. Then in 2007, Jay-Z sold his rights for $204 million, so that was a huge success as well. Jay-Z also co-owns the 4040 Club, which is an upscale sports bar that started in New York City and has expanded now to Atlantic City and Chicago. However, in 2008, the 4040 Club in Las Vegas that was there got closed down because the attendance steadily declined, so that was a little major flaw in the 4040 Club in terms of anything relating to failure in that business venture. Another major deal he did was become part owner of the Brooklyn Nets NBA team, having paid a reported of around $4.5 million for his share in that team. In 2014, he bought a luxury French champagne brand, which I can't pronounce at all, and the bottles have retailed for as much as $200,000 per bottle, and reportedly it's doing very good. He recently released a bottle that is priced more fairly at $850 for people that can afford it. In 2015, he invested $20 million into an app called JetSmarter, which is Uber for private jets, basically for rich people that want to schedule their private jet flight. They can do it with that app. He's had millions and millions upon real estate investments, like I said earlier. And back in 2015 as well, Jay-Z spent $56 million to buy Tidal, and now Tidal is worth roughly around $600 million because in 2017, Tidal sold 33% of its stake to Sprint for $200 million, so that would value it at around $600 million. And to me, the best deal he's done was marrying Beyonce. I know a lot of people don't look at it that way because they're in a relationship, they're in love, they have kids, and that's the way it's supposed to be looked at. But him marrying Beyonce obviously increased his net worth because now they have shared income, and on top of that, it's increased his brand and his name around the world. Beyonce is known around the world a lot more than Jay-Z, and Jay-Z now worldwide has gotten way bigger because of that. Adding on to that, Jay-Z has Roc Nation, which was a management music company, which he manages J. Cole, Wale, a bunch of other big artists, and he has Roc Nation Sports, which manages sports athletes in football and basketball, whatever the case is. So he has a lot of brands and a lot of ventures, and this is why people look at him now more as a businessman than an artist. And because of that, it's actually elevated him as an artist, because when you see him on features with certain artists and certain songs, a lot of people get more excited because it's harder now to get Jay-Z on a track because he's so busy with other business ventures. And in fact, he does not make a lot of money from music, so now it's going to be even harder to get him on features. And since it makes him more rare, that attracts more eyes to the song whenever he's featured on somebody's track. So all of these deals, all these business ventures have elevated Jay-Z's brand to legendary status in terms of hip-hop and in terms of the mainstream world, partly in thanks to Beyonce. Now let's talk about Eminem's brand and what he has done outside of music. This is going to be fairly short because, as you guys know, Eminem is mainly looked at as an artist. He hasn't had much business ventures or anything outside of music that he's done, partly because he says he's so in love with music and loves making it that he doesn't want to be distracted with other ventures. The few things that he's done outside of music was create the record label Shady Records, which is looked at as a business venture, even though it's still relating to music. That label obviously signed 50 Cent, which is their biggest act, signed D12, Obi Trice, so on and so forth. On top of that, he started venturing into acting. He didn't do that much in acting. He obviously had the lead role in 8 Mile, which was based on his life, and then appeared on the movie The Interview and a few other little roles here and there, like in the movie Funny People, stuff like that, but it wasn't anything major. And there's only 2 brand deals that you can point to relating with Eminem. The one that he did with 2 commercials for Lipton's Brisk Iced Tea in the Super Bowl, and the second one was the one where he was advertising the Chrysler 200 vehicle where he drives around Detroit with Lose Yourself playing in the background. And ultimately what makes Eminem's brand so big and what attracts people to his name was the fact that he's one of the best artists to do it and the best-selling hip-hop artist to date. And that alone attracts people to your name. On top of that, Eminem doesn't really work with a bunch of artists outside his camp. It's rare, and when it does happen, a lot of people tune in because they want to hear what Eminem sounds like with either a current-gen artist or someone that he was supposed to work with a while ago, and people tune in automatically. Now let's talk about cultural impact, and we're going to start with Eminem. He's had a huge cultural impact. For starters, he gave us 50 Cent and G-Unit. He helped build 50 to what he is today, and 50's had a huge impact in the industry, as I highlighted in the last episode. Plus, Eminem being white really helped hip-hop in terms of sales. Every year Eminem would drop an album, sales would spike for other artists. He definitely helped push forward hip-hop into the mainstream light. Because of him being white, a lot of white people started listening to hip-hop even more. This is what I highlighted earlier in the episode. He also inspired a lot of artists. Even the person he just recently beefed with, which is Machine Gun Kelly, he himself said that Eminem inspired him to make music. He also inspired Joyner Lucas, all kinds of newer artists that have come into the game. We've heard a lot of artists talk good about Eminem and say that they grew up listening to him, such as Kendrick Lamar, Ed Sheeran, Lil Wayne, Nicki Minaj, T.I., Joe Budden, Royce the 5'9", Wiz Khalifa. So many artists have said that they've listened to Eminem and have taken from him inspiration and all kinds of other things. Nicki Minaj has those alter egos, she says, because of Eminem, because as we know, Eminem has Slim Shady, Marshall Mathers, and then Eminem. Kendrick Lamar has said various times he got influenced by him. So he's influenced a lot of artists. It just doesn't reflect directly into the music sometimes. Sometimes you have to look for it in order to notice it.
Eminem is, one of the greatest of all time, and nobody can take that from him. Mm-hmm. I can't take it. New artists can't take it. No, nothing. That boy wordplay is out of this world, excluding the fact of whatever racial color, hip-hop is hip-hop, and he got it.
And Eminem's music will resonate years from now. The song Stand Alone has inspired a lot of artists to write storytelling tracks. J. Cole said that he wrote Lost Ones because of that. Joyner Lucas said that he wrote a couple of his songs because of that song. Lil Wayne even wrote a song called Dear Ann, which was his version of Eminem's Stan. So a lot of artists have been influenced by Eminem, either indirectly or directly. Now let's talk about Jay-Z's cultural impact, and this one is very clear. In terms of the artists Jay-Z has influenced, it's the same thing as Eminem. Both of them are held to a high standard when it comes to other artists that came after them. Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Kanye West, Rihanna, so on and so forth, all have mentioned Jay-Z as an influence. There really isn't any artist that you can point to that says he wasn't influenced by Jay-Z or even Eminem. However, the one thing that Jay-Z doesn't have that Eminem always had was the fact that Jay-Z never had his own year in terms of music where he dominated completely, where everyone was paying attention to him. Every year he dropped, he would usually be the second or third best-selling artist that year in hip-hop. Sometimes Eminem would overshadow him. Sometimes it would be other artists. So he never really had that major year where everyone was focused on him. And Eminem had that basically every year he released an album. But the one thing Eminem didn't have that Jay-Z has is the fact that Jay-Z influenced a lot of artists to get into business and to turn themselves into businessmen through the deals that Jay-Z did. The one thing that stood out to a lot of artists on how to sell their album was the deal that Jay-Z did with the Magna Carta Holy Grail album in 2013, where he linked up with Samsung. Samsung purchased 1 million copies of the album, and then whoever had a Samsung phone and had the Magna Carta Holy Grail app would get the album. The first 1 million users would get it. Unfortunately, the app ended up crashing a lot and didn't work out the way that he wanted to, but he still sold those 1 million copies to Samsung. So it showed and inspired a lot of artists that you can get your money in sales in different ways. You just got to know how to find deals and do it in a different, unique way that would stand out. Jay-Z is also held to a high regard in hip-hop in terms of how much he's influenced it, in terms of what he's done for hip-hop by helping provide for a lot of other artists and essentially looking out for them when they needed him.
And so Jay was my mentor before I ever signed to him, and now that I signed to him, it's just a blessing to be able to hit him for advice and get that real 20 years of experience and however long he's been in the game. You know what I mean? It's priceless.
The last and final category is longevity. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, Eminem and Jay-Z both have longevity. However, they both have moments as well where things did not look too good for them when it came to the music. Let's talk about Eminem and what he's done since his debut album, which released in 1999. Since then, he's released 8 albums, and they've all done amazing in first week sales. He's had the #1 first week sales each year every time he released an album, besides these last 2 years. In the year 2000, he released the Marshall Mathers LP, which sold 1.78 million copies within the first week, which was unheard of a hip-hop artist doing. And to this date, this album is the #2 best-selling hip-hop album of all time. Following that, he released the Eminem Show, and this did insane numbers as well. This album was released in 2002 and sold 1.3 million copies within the first week and holds the #4 spot for the best-selling hip-hop albums of all time. So Eminem is in the top 5 spot for that 2 times with Marshall Mathers LP and Eminem Show. He then followed that up with Encore. In 2004, he sold 710,000 copies within the first week, and that was the highest sales of that whole year in the first week. And that continued. Even though he had a break because of the drug problems that he was having, he still had his artist, 50 Cent, selling insane numbers. And then when he came back in 2009 with Relapse, he sold over 600,000 copies within the first week there, and that was the highest selling album as well. Then in 2010, he released Recovery and sold over 700,000 copies within the first week, which was again the highest selling album of that year that was released. Then he released the Marshall Mathers LP2 in 2013 and ended up selling another 700,000 copies within the first week, which was once again the highest selling album that year. And now this is where a lot of people will argue about Eminem's longevity versus Jay-Z's, because in 2017 when he released his Revival album, it did not do that well in terms of first week sales, and he wasn't no longer the top selling artist in hip hop for that year. He actually fell short behind Kendrick Lamar and Drake. He ended up becoming the third best selling artist with 267,000 copies within the first week. And Jay-Z was right under him with 444 with 262,000 copies. And then in 2018, when he released Kamikaze, he ended up becoming the number 5 best selling first week sales artist in hip hop with 434,000 copies. However, he did become the best selling artist in terms of pure album sales, which is physical album sales. So that was definitely a good look and revalidated him as someone having longevity in hip hop and people caring for his music still. Eminem stayed consistent throughout the years when it comes to sales. He rarely ever dipped below or went way too high. He stayed consistent. If you look at it, you could almost average out his sales to be roughly anywhere from 500 to 600,000 copies within the first week, which is very consistent and good. Jay-Z's longevity isn't so much in the sales, even though he did amazing on each album. The fact of the matter is that he's had a number 1 album ever since he dropped Volume 2, Hard Knock Life in 1998. Since then till now, every album he's released has gone number 1. When Volume 2 came out, it sold 350,000 copies within the first week and has gone 5 times platinum as of now. And then from there, he's been consistently doing around 300 to 400,000 copies within the first week, no matter the climate and music, besides his most recent album, 444, which did 262,000 copies the first week with streams added. Although Jay-Z did take a break from 2003 to roughly around 2006, he said he was retired, which definitely affected his run in the music industry, just like when Eminem had that hiatus because of his drug problems. However, both these artists have had their latest album resonate very well with hip-hop culture. As we know, when 444 came out, a lot of younger artists were getting upset at the things that Hov was saying, like the money to the ear thing. A lot of artists were responding to that. So people were clearly paying attention to what Jay-Z was saying with his latest album. And the same thing with Eminem's Kamikaze. When he dropped that, he was going at a lot of people. It caused a lot of controversy in hip-hop. He even started the battle with Machine Gun Kelly, which caused a lot of attention to Eminem and even Machine Gun Kelly. So clearly both of these artists still have the attention of the younger generation and the older generation, so they both have great longevity. Now, after all those facts, it's time to give my opinion on who I think is better in each category and who I overall think is the bigger artist. I'm going to mention the category, talk about the artists that won in that category, and then briefly explain why they won. The first category is debut impact, and I give this to Eminem because his debut album ended up selling better overall as time went on. And on top of that, a lot of the reviewers and critics, when they first heard of him, had not heard of an artist like this in hip-hop at all. He had multiple personalities, very, very vulgar lyrics. I mean, he was going at his own mom, and Eminem faced a lot of backlash because of him being white. Jay-Z, on the other hand, got a lot of great reviews on his debut album and did well on it, but a lot of people were comparing him to other rap artists that were already around. All they said was that Jay-Z had a better way of delivering his lyrics, and that's simply not enough to have a better debut impact. The second category is brand, and this one is by a long shot on Jay-Z's side. As we know, Jay-Z has expanded his brand into amazing business deals, amazing things that he's changed forever in hip-hop with the deals that he's done, and Eminem has just simply stayed in music and barely did any acting and barely did any sponsorship deals or anything like that. The only argument you can make in this is that Eminem's name and brand is bigger worldwide than Jay-Z's, but that isn't enough to simply overshadow all the stuff that Jay-Z has done when it comes to business in developing his brand. And on top of that, Jay-Z married Beyonce, and she's incredibly huge, just as big as Eminem. The next category is longevity, and this category is simply tied between the two because they both have longevity. They haven't fallen off at all, and that's why this argument between Eminem and Jay-Z is so interesting, because these two have lasted both 3 decades and are still continuing to have an impact in the culture. Whenever they release music or whatever they do, people still pay attention to them. So in this category, for me, they both tied it. So now if you look at it, it's 2 for Eminem, 2 for Jay-Z. Now, this category, cultural impact, is the one that's going to be the tiebreaker. And for cultural impact, I give it to Jay-Z. And here's why. Listen to me clearly before you get in the comments and attack me. And why Jay-Z has won is because he's done simply more as a brand, which in turn has done more for the hip-hop culture. Notice I said brand and not artist. We know Eminem is the best-selling artist. We know his music reaches throughout the whole world. We know he's brought in more of a white audience into hip-hop, more people listening to hip-hop. But has he done more outside of that? And what he's done has been amazing. Don't get me wrong. Those are incredible feats, which has made him a legend in today's standards. Besides giving us 50 Cent, he hasn't really done more outside of music. And this is where Jay-Z wins in this category. Jay-Z is very, very consistent, not only with the music, but in the other things that he does. If you notice, whenever Eminem drops an album, he pretty much disappears and you never hear from him again until he's ready to drop more music. He doesn't do anything outside of music, which is a good thing and a bad thing. If you're a fan and you solely like him for the music, it's amazing that he focuses on the music and he's very good at it. But if you're a fan of him as a person, you don't really get much outside of the music, and that's where the issue lies in how much he's impacted the culture. Jay-Z is all over the place because his brand has expanded outside the music. He's so big that President Obama was quoting him and talking about him, and he was able to travel to Cuba, a place where nobody was able to travel to. He got that pass from Obama. So just things like that is what made Jay-Z such a big cultural impact for not only hip-hop, but for mainstream American media. On top of that, he's helped aided a lot of careers such as Kanye West, Rihanna, and J. Cole. These three artists are incredibly huge, and Jay-Z had a huge role in how big they became. He even was on the cover of Time magazine for the 100 most influential people in the world. He even covered a magazine with Warren Buffett on Forbes. So that says a lot about how far he's come and how consistent he's been throughout the years. Like I said, he's still relevant to this day. Eminem is too, but Eminem is more relevant just musically instead of the other things that he does. Now, if Eminem were to expand to other things, I'm not saying he wouldn't succeed in it, because when he did 8 Mile, he won an Oscar for that. So obviously he's very successful whenever he tries to do other things, but for some reason he just likes to focus on music, and that limits his brand a lot. And a lot of what the cultural impact has is what your brand is and how big it is. But that's my take on it. That's my opinion. Like I said, throughout the video, towards the end, I'll give my opinion. The rest is all facts, stuff that you can look up yourself. And that's it for this episode of Who's Bigger. This one was Eminem versus Jay-Z. And now I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments below. Based off those 4 categories, who do you think is the bigger artist? I'll definitely be reading the comments and responding to as much as I can, because I'm very interested in seeing what you guys say on this. And with that being said, if you guys want to support this channel further, you can do so at patreon.com/diverse mentality. For just $1 a month or more, you can help support this channel further. A link is in the description below. Like, comment, share, and definitely subscribe. I do videos like this daily on hip-hop news and much more, so definitely subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at QuakeGW. Like us on Facebook, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.